Last week, you may have heard there were some big decisions that came down out of the Supreme Court, and it's frankly got a lot of legal conservatives scratching their heads because there's been a movement among legal conservatives over the years to actually get some folks into different positions as judges who shared the legal conservative viewpoint, which was originalism and textualism. And that basically means that the way you interpret a law is based on the text of the law itself, not a bunch of other things. First, you look at the text itself, and you try to interpret the text as the original meaning of the text would have been when the law was written. Okay, so you don't get into things like, well, what was the legislative intent? And the reason is because, well, I guess it depends on the legislator you asked, right? Because these legislators, they vote on something, they all had a different intent. So there's no legislative intent. There's no sense of Congress. We don't know why they actually did this stuff. So all we can reasonably base an interpretation on is the text itself. You know, we don't want to go find out, well, how do they do it in China and India? Because that doesn't matter because those aren't our system. So we need to base it on the text itself. And that really has been the undergirding of the entire legal conservative movement, which has built a lot of momentum in this country from almost zero, because back in the early 80s, there were almost no legal conservatives. There were very, very few. And then a group started called the Federalist Society, and it's grown to be quite an influential group. And part of what the Federalist Society has been able to do is have influence on who's been appointed as Supreme Court justices, including John Roberts, including Neil Gorsuch, including Brett Kavanaugh, Samuel Alito, others, Justice Thomas, others. All of the good conservative justices have generally come out of the Federalist Society model for legal interpretation. Certainly Justice Scalia was sort of the godfather of that movement. So, but what happened last week? Last week we got some decisions, and I'll tell you, it's come to show you that you can't count on these people. Now, we already knew we couldn't count on Chief Justice Roberts, right? After he decided that Obamacare was going to be upheld, we knew the guy was a total sellout, and he does not disappoint yet again, because last week 2 rulings came out. The Daka Ruling, which basically said, first of all, it's acknowledged even by President Obama that he didn't have the authority to do DACA, the delayed arrival, childhood, whatever it is. It's for folks who were brought here by their parents illegally, and they're saying we're not going to deport them, okay? Now, DACA was not legal. President Obama admitted he didn't have the authority as the executive to do it, but he did it anyway. And then President Trump came in and he said, we're gonna stop DACA. We're going to end that program. And now the Supreme Court said, well, you didn't give us a good reason for that. You didn't comply with the Administrative Procedures Act and give us a reason that wasn't arbitrary and capricious. Now, you might be able to do it, but you haven't done it so far. And I'm going, wait a minute. You telling me that the president can't stop doing something that's not legal to begin with, and you're citing some act like the Administrative Procedures Act to constrain his conduct? That just doesn't make any sense. The reasoning is very thin on that. It's obvious what they're doing. I mean, this is plain. They want to stymie President Trump's efforts at every turn, and the globalists don't want to stop illegal immigration. Period. The end. That's all there is to it. So that decision came down 5-4 with Justice Roberts siding with the quote-unquote liberal wing of the court, okay, who never seems to have any defectors, by the way. If you notice that, they stick together. Those are 4 solid votes. The conservative wing, which technically has the majority of the court, can't seem to stick together on any of these. The other decision that came down last week is what's called the Bostock Case, and that involved the expansion of Title VII, which is under the Civil Rights Act, prohibits sex discrimination, which was always understood to mean and intended to mean at the time, the original meaning of it was discrimination against men or women because of their sex. But now they've taken that, they've twisted it, and they've seriously expanded it. Okay, now this can be done. Okay, if there's the political will for this, they should do this through Congress. But they shouldn't do it through a Supreme Court decision. But that's exactly what they did with Justice Gorsuch. You know, our hero, Justice Gorsuch, the guy who's supposed to save us, writing the opinion. And this was a 6-3 decision with both Justice Gorsuch and Chief Justice Roberts siding with the so-called liberal wing of the court. 6-3, expanding Title VII to include prohibition of discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, i.e. transgenderism. So this is what's come out of the court now. They're legislating from the bench because they believe that these things are discriminatory and should be changed. And maybe you do too, and I think a lot of people believe this. Well, guess what? We have a process for that. That can go through Congress. That's how legislation is supposed to be done, not through the Supreme Court. We've got other big rulings coming down. There's going to be a ruling coming down on the abortion case out of Louisiana that required doctors to have admitting privileges at a local hospital to be able to perform an abortion, which prevents a lot of these doctors because they don't have admitting privileges because they just work at these abortion clinics like Planned Parenthood, and they don't admit patients to a hospital because they don't actually provide medical care for anybody. All they do is provide death for little babies in the womb and then vacuum them out. That's all they do. That's their job. That's considered medical care. What about do no harm? First, do no harm, right? The Hippocratic Oath. What about that? No, they're allowed to do that. And that all comes from a decision 50 years ago that basically said that an unborn baby wasn't a person. It was a fetus. Of course, back then we didn't even know how developed these babies are in the womb, that at 18 days after, the beginning of the child, after conception, 18 days, the creature has a heartbeat. The baby has a heartbeat. It's not just a fetus. It's not a lump of cells. It's not a disembodied thing that we can just vacuum away. It's a person already, and it only gets more developed from there. So we expect the abortion ruling to come out. I'm not holding my breath that that's going to be positive for the conservative legal movement. We've also got Trump's tax returns ruling to come out. So I'm expecting even more disappointment from this group at the Supreme Court who has let us down so much. And what a disappointment, what a shame they are to say that they uphold conservative principles, to say that they follow textualism and originalism. And the truth is they don't. They decide how they want the outcome to happen, and they make the ruling up from there. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.